And 300 episodes. We are celebrating the milestone with a lighthearted episode that ranks all 16 Stanley Cup playoff teams. Which teams would Ranger fans like to see win the Stanley Cup? And which ones would make us sick?
You're Locked on the New York Rangers, your daily podcast on the New York Rangers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, Blue Shirts fans, to episode number 1,300 of the Locked On New York Rangers podcast. I'm your host, John Chick. Just want to thank you guys, as always, for making Locked On New York Rangers your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. And today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $250 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. And we are, of course, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So first of all, right off the top of this show, huge thank you to everybody who's ever supported Locked On New York Rangers in any way. We're hitting another mini milestone here, 1,300 episodes, and it's been a blast. We've seen it all throughout all these episodes and all these seasons since this podcast began, and it's been a lot of fun. It's been a pleasure to go through Ranger hockey with all you guys, all of us essentially trying to keep each other sane and deal with all the inevitable highs and lows that come with being a fan of this New York Rangers hockey team. It's been quite the experience. And again, thank you guys so much for supporting this show in any way that you have over the years. And if it's your first time listening, welcome aboard as well. And we like to have fun here. Good time, fun little Ranger community that we've built over the last couple of years together. And for this episode, like I said in the intro just a second ago, I wanted to do something a little bit more lighthearted, a little bit more fun. There's obviously a big storyline going on with the Rangers. I mean, there's several big storylines going on right now, but the one big one, I think that's kind of overshadowing everything else, at least for the time being, is who is going to be the next head coach of this New York Rangers team. We discussed Mike Sullivan in yesterday's episode, and assuming the Rangers do not hire a new head coach by tomorrow, that's probably what we'll do in tomorrow's episode, look at a couple different other candidates that are available. But I wanted to do this episode. I've had this idea, ever since it became obvious that the Rangers were not going to make the playoffs. Let's go ahead and rank all 16 Stanley Cup playoff teams from likability to unlikability, essentially through the eyes of at least one Ranger fan. We're going to go ahead and kind of just from the team that we would most like to see win the Stanley Cup to the team that we would least like to see win the Stanley Cup. Of the 16 playoff teams, we're just going to go right through the list, have some fun with it. Hopefully get a laugh or two out of this episode. We will see. And I'll just explain my reasoning as we go through the list. So we'll start with the team that I would most like to see win the Stanley Cup. Number one, it's going to be the Minnesota Wild. And there's really only one reason, or at least one reason that is head and shoulders above anything else. And that reason is Matt Zuccarello. This is somebody that was obviously a beloved Ranger during his time here. It's very difficult to get Ranger fans to agree on just about anything. All 100% of the fan base to agree on this player or this coach or that coach or whatever it might be. But you'd be hard pressed to find a Ranger fan that doesn't like Matt Zuccarello. And that was tough seeing him get traded. Obviously, it was necessary for the Rangers to facilitate their rebuild. But something that is kind of funny and kind of depressing all at the same time. I saw somebody post this on social media. Matt Zuccarello has essentially outlasted the Ranger rebuild and quite possibly outlasted the Ranger championship window, because if we see more Ranger hockey next year, like what we just saw this year, that championship window is closed. I'm not going to go that far just yet, but Matt Zuccarello has been awesome. The Wild in a dogfight with Vegas right now. And that series is 2-2. And look, I mean, beyond Zuccarello, Kaprizov is an exciting young player. I think he needs more of the spotlight. I think that would be good for the NHL. For as good as he is, I don't think too many non-NHL fans really know about him. He's not really a household name, and be interesting to see him get a little bit more attention. I mean, certainly hockey fans are keenly aware of him, but non-hockey fans are not. The Wild don't really have a ton of superstars, but they do have depth, and that kind of makes them likable too. But for me, the big reason here is Matt Zuccarello. Matt Zuccarello needs a Stanley Cup for everything he's been through, that horrific injury that he had with the Rangers. Go Minnesota Wild. I'm rooting for them until they get knocked out, if that does ultimately happen. Number two, we're going to go with the Colorado Avalanche. And a big reason why, once again, they're as high on this list as they are is a couple of former New York Rangers that are on that team right now. Two of my more well-liked players in this recent era of Ranger hockey. I mean, Lindgren's been one of my absolute favorites for the Rangers. And look, his play obviously slipped this season, and the Rangers did what they had to do. He's an impending UFA. You got to get something for him, and they did that. And they sent Lindgren, as well as Jimmy Vesey, over to the Colorado Avalanche. And Lindgren's played well. The first 4 playoff games for the Avalanche, he had 2 assists and was a +4 with 9 hits. Just a heart and soul kind of player, and somebody that I would love to see at the end of this whole thing, holding the Stanley Cup above his head. You know, there'd be a whole bunch of like blood running down his face and everything else. But Ryan Lindgren is a Stanley Cup champion. Yeah, I could get on board with that for sure. And Jimmy Vesey, you know, he's obviously very much a role player for the Avalanche. In fact, he did not play in any of the first 4 Stanley Cup playoff games for the Avs. I don't know if he played in Game 5. Didn't happen to catch the box score for that, but you know, I'd love to see Vesey win it, even if it is very much as a role player. Beyond the 2 former Rangers, you know, the Gabriel Landeskog story is pretty cool. The guy misses basically 3 full seasons of hockey, comes back for the playoffs, and had a big game in Game 4 to lead the Avalanche to a much-needed win there. And Avs now down 3-2, but they're not done yet. I think we know that for sure. You know, usually I don't like seeing a team win a Stanley Cup and then win the Stanley Cup again not too long after that. But for the Avalanche, I'll make a little bit of an exception for the reasons that I just mentioned. Again, Ryan Lindgren, love to see him win a Stanley Cup. Jimmy Vesey would really like to see him win a Stanley Cup too. And like I said, that Landeskog story is pretty cool. So, you know, obviously the 2 of them, Lindgren and Vesey, weren't there for the most recent Avalanche Stanley Cup, but they would be there for this one. And Lindgren playing a pretty prominent role for the Avs as well. Number 3, I'm going to go with the Ottawa Senators. There's no like big reason why I have them ranked this high. They don't have any former Rangers or anything like that on the team, but they're very much an underdog. This is their first playoff appearance in about 300 years, or so it seems. You know, it's been a long time coming for the Senators to get back into the playoffs. They've been trying to put it all together. They do have some exciting young talent on this team, and they're doing what they can. They're going up against the Toronto Maple Leafs right now, and that's been a really exciting series. Games 2, 3, and 4 have all gone into overtime. The Senators had to win Game 4 in overtime to keep from being swept and eliminated, and they did that. So that series goes on, at least for one more game. But I don't know. I just think it's an underdog team, and I think it's very easy to root for them. They're kind of this upstart, young, exciting team. And from a business standpoint, I've mentioned this in the past as well, but looking at like growing the NHL and getting it more popular into more, you know, households in this country, around the world, whatever it might be, just seeing the NHL rise in popularity, I think you need to do your best to market the Tkachuk brothers. I think they're highly marketable players. The mainstream guys that everybody knows of, you know, Crosby, Ovechkin, those guys aren't going to be around forever. And you do have to eventually, you know, aim the spotlight at some younger players. And I think it's good that Brady Tkachuk is in the playoffs for the first time. And that's good for the NHL moving forward. Like I said, it's been a really exciting series. I've probably caught more of Sens Leafs than any other playoff series so far. It's funny how you just kind of grab onto this series or that series when your team isn't in it. But I've kind of been captivated by what I've seen from Senators and Leafs, and very much looking forward to Game 5 in that series. Number 4, we're going to go with the St. Louis Blues. And again, this is a team that is very much elevated by the fact that there's a former Ranger on that roster that I really like, that I'm sure a lot of you really like, and that I know a lot of you will never forgive Chris Drury for trading, and that is, of course, Pavel Buchnevich. That is far and away the worst move that Drury has made in his tenure as Ranger GM. He's made some good moves too, but as far as like the worst moves he's ever made, that's pretty much got to be number 1, right? I mean, what would be above that? So I think that's number 1. And on top of Buchnevich, and certainly I'd love to see him win a Stanley Cup. That would be great. But I'll always sort of have a soft spot for the Blues just because of what they did in 2019. They were playing the Bruins in the Stanley Cup final, and they beat them in 7 games, went into Boston and shut them out, beat them 4-0 in that game, prevented the Boston Bruins from winning a Stanley Cup. So for that reason alone, I've always kind of had a soft spot for the Blues ever since that happened. And for that reason, I'll always kind of back them a little bit. I mean, look, obviously, none of these teams that I'm ranking here can hold a candle to the Rangers as far as my fandom. But, you know, I do love the Stanley Cup playoffs like a lot of you do as well. And the cold, hard truth is the Rangers aren't in it. And so we got to grab on to this team or that team and, you know, kind of cheer them on. And similar to the Wild, who I mentioned earlier, on this list. The Blues, they don't really have a ton of big names on their roster, but in a way that's kind of fun too. It's just a hardworking, well-rounded, deep team. They really had to catch fire toward the end of the season. They went on a rampage to even force their way into the playoffs, so you have to respect that. They were basically playing playoff hockey before playoff hockey. And give them credit, showing some guts. They were down 2 games to none of the Jets. They've won the 2 games at home, and we'll see what happens. That's been a really fun series to watch so far as well. I probably would have put the Blues at number 3, but one thing that held me back from doing that, I do not like Jordan Binnington. Just not a fan. Just, Tommy Tough guy out there, and always something with him, always looking to stir the pot a little bit, and never actually does anything. You know what I mean? Like it never comes down to him actually doing anything. He just kind of runs his mouth and then kind of hides behind his teammates or the refs or whoever happens to be nearby. Not a Binnington fan at all, but be that as it may, I like Buchnevich enough, and I like the rest of the Blues players enough to put them at number 4 on this list. And this is really where sort of the first tier of teams on this episode ends. These are the 4 teams that I just mentioned here that I would actually like to see them win the Stanley Cup. We're going to get into kind of that middle ground in just a second here. Teams that it's kind of just like, okay, if they win the Stanley Cup, don't love it, don't hate it, we move on, right? And then at the end, that's going to be the really fun section where we can kind of basically just take aim at the teams that we don't like, the teams that Ranger fans typically do not like. But we're going to get into both of those groups in just a second. All right, we just want to take a minute to let everybody know that today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by FanDuel. The NBA playoffs are here, and FanDuel is giving new customers an incredible way to get in on the action. Right now, when you join FanDuel and place your first $5 bet, you will get $250 in bonus bets if your bet wins. FanDuel makes betting so easy, whether it's picking your favorite team or diving into player props. From 3-pointers to steals to assists, FanDuel has so many ways to bet your favorite player props. Plus, after the game tips off, you can even combine live prop bets into a same-game parlay for a chance to win big. Don't miss out. Head to FanDuel.com and claim your $250 in bonus bets today. All right, let's go ahead and keep everything rolling here on Locked On New York Rangers. Big shout out to the everydayers as always. Thank you guys so much for supporting this podcast. Again, 1,300 episodes. Some might be newer that are listening or watching today, and some have been there since this show was in single digits, which just completely blows my mind. But thank you either way. Thank you very much for that. And in our next episode, we're going to, as I mentioned earlier, look at a couple other head coaching candidates for the New York Rangers. This is, of course, assuming that there's not breaking news that the Rangers have hired this person or that person between now and then. It sounds like they could look to move quickly on Mike Sullivan, but we'll see how that whole thing shakes out. As a couple of you have pointed out, Sullivan might be coveted by the Bruins as well. My understanding is that Sullivan has family in Boston or the Boston area, so we'll see how everything goes. But let's continue going forward with this list. Number 5, I'm going to go with the Los Angeles Kings. I was kind of surprised at how high I ended up ranking this team, but I just look at the roster and I just have a hard time coming up with like any player that I don't like or any real reason to root against this team. It's a generally hardworking team. They have a decent amount of players that I actually like quite a bit. I've always felt that Adrian Kempe is one of the more underrated players in the NHL. Feels like he's just now starting to get his credit, get his due. Philip Deneau, rock solid all-around player. The Rangers were kind of connected to him when he became a free agent, and it would have been an overpayment and probably better off that they didn't do that, but he was a player that certainly intrigued me when that was the case, and of course he ultimately signs with the Kings. Quentin Byfield, obviously, exciting young player, seems to finally be starting to put it all together a little bit there. And the one thing you could say is that, yes, the Rangers were defeated by the Kings in the Stanley Cup final, but that feels like a million years ago at this point. It's more than 10 years ago, if you can possibly believe that. 11 years. And just about every player that was on that Kings roster is gone now. I mean, their Hall of Fame goalie is now with us. Jonathan Quick, now a member of the Rangers. And the only 2 guys that are still there, to my knowledge, are Doughty and Kopitar. And I don't really have anything against either player. I mean, I don't necessarily love either player, but I don't dislike them either. So, again, I don't really have a reason to love this team, which is why they're not in the first group. It's not like I'm going to be sitting here like going nuts rooting for the Los Angeles Kings. I'm not really going to do that with any of these teams. Maybe the Wild, just for Zuccarello, possibly winning a Stanley Cup. But I've got no reason to dislike the Kings either, and that's why they rank as high as they do. Number 5 on this list. Now we're going to go to number 6, and I'm going to say right now, I think this is probably going to be my most controversial ranking on this list. So fair warning, you have been warned. You should be prepared. Number 6, I'm going to go with the Toronto Maple Leafs, and I need everybody to hear me out on this. I'm not really sure why this team is so despised among hockey fans everywhere. They haven't won anything in forever. I know they've got a whole boatload of Stanley Cups, but none of them are in any kind of recent history whatsoever. There's also not really a ton of history between the Rangers and the Leafs, especially when it comes to the playoffs. I've been a fan of this Ranger team for more than 30 years. They've never even met each other in the playoffs, and all the time that I've been a fan. Now, granted, they were in the Western Conference for some of that, but not most of it. Most of it they've been in the Eastern Conference. And I just find the storyline compelling with the Leafs because we've seen them lose in the first round and lose in the first round and lose in the first round. And they made it to the second round this year and lose in the first round. So to me, that in and of itself is pretty compelling. And what adds to it for me is you've got the big four, obviously Matthews, Nylander, Tavares, and Marner. This is their last crack at it too. Because I mean, some of them will still be there, obviously, but Tavares and Marner, both UFAs after this season. I don't think there's any way that they both end up being back with the Leafs. They could both be on their way. We will see. But I just think it's kind of an interesting storyline. On top of that, a player that I really like on their team is Max Pacioretty. Some of I've talked about this in the past, but I got to interview him a handful of times. He's from Connecticut, just like I am. Was always, a good interview. Just a good guy and somebody that I think it would be cool to see him win a Stanley Cup at the very end here because you got to figure he's just about running out of chances. Is Max Pacioretty? I believe he's like 36 or 37 now, so he's getting toward the end. And I feel for Ryan Reeves. I really liked him when he was a member of the Rangers. He is now in the AHL, which, when you're 37, 38, whatever Reeves is at this point, that really can't be a lot of fun. But he did play enough games this year with the Leafs, 35 games where, I don't know the exact cutoff or anything, but I got to believe he would be recognized as a Stanley Cup champion and somebody that certainly has paid his dues and played his role to a T over the years, the role of the enforcer. So there's more to like about the Leafs than what first comes to mind. And I know a lot of people don't like the members of the Big Four. I don't really like any of them that much, but I don't really dislike any of them either. Islander fans don't like Tavares because God forbid a free agent signs with a different team, right? So the enemy of my enemy is my friend, right? So I don't know. I don't really get the Leafs hate. And maybe some of you will explain it to me in the YouTube comment section and I'll see it and I'll think like, okay, maybe that's why, teams or why fans don't like this team or that team. But for right now, yeah, I got the Leafs at number 6. Number 7, I'm going to go with the Winnipeg Jets. I don't really have much to say. There are a few teams in professional sports that will evoke as little emotion in me as the Winnipeg Jets. I just hear the name and I feel almost nothing. I guess the reason why I have them toward the top of this list as opposed to the bottom is there is that underdog element. Now, that granted, they did have the best record in the NHL this year, but the Winnipeg Jets history, both iterations of the Jets have pretty miserable track records. Like, there's not a whole lot of winning to talk of. There's not a lot of deep playoff runs to speak of either. So even though they have such a great record this season, I still kind of look at them as the underdogs, so I guess he can pull for them a little bit. I also feel for Connor Hellebuck because, if he continues to get lit up and they lose in the first round, he's going to have a very long offseason. He's starting to get blamed as somebody, or he's starting to get labeled as somebody who can't get it done in the playoffs. And then you do have a couple of former Rangers on the team, Pionk, Barron, and Nemestikov. I don't really care that much if one of them wins the Stanley Cup, but I have nothing against any of those players either. So, yeah, like I said, not a whole lot to say about the Jets. Moving on to number 8, gonna go with the Montreal Canadiens. This is another one that I feel like certain Ranger fans will tell me that I have ranked too high. I have them, I guess, just in the top half as opposed to the bottom half here. Keep in mind, though, I was not around. I was not alive when the Canadiens had these powerhouse teams that were winning the Stanley Cup every single season. I was not around when the Canadiens beat the Rangers in the Stanley Cup final in 5 games. So I didn't have to live through that. I have seen, when it comes to the Canadiens, I have seen 3 matchups since I've been a Ranger fan between the Rangers and the Canadiens in the playoffs, and the Rangers have won all 3. So I've never experienced a moment where like the Canadiens, push the Rangers around, knock them out of the playoffs, shattered their hopes and dreams. I realized that did happen in 1979, but I was -7 years old when that happened. So, there's nothing really that I totally dislike about this team. I mean, I guess the fan base can be a little bit obnoxious, and they still blame Chris Kreider for that, even though he got tripped into Carey Price. As far as things that I do like, I like Marty St. Louis. I mean, I have to, right? He was a former guest on Locked On New York Rangers before he got this head coaching gig. So I like Marty. I'm glad that he's doing well there. They have some exciting young players on their team for sure. And, again, not a team that I'm like dying to see win the whole thing, but I'm rooting for them in the first round. We'll get to their opponent quite a bit later on this list. Number 9, I'm going to go with the Edmonton Oilers. This team is weighed down by Evander Kane, just multiple incidents away from the rink. It's just one of those guys that it feels like it's always something. You know what I mean? I could do without Evander Kane winning a Stanley Cup, and he came pretty close last year, as did the majority of players on this team. As far as the rest of the roster, I mean, Connor McDavid's all right. I respect the hell out of him. I mean, he's an unbelievable player. He's going to go down as one of the all-time greats. And there's a storyline there, as he continues to try to find his first Stanley Cup. But, I mean, I don't know. Either way, if McDavid gets knocked out in the first round, fine. If he advances, fine. I can't bring myself to care all that much about Connor McDavid at this point. If he gets into like his mid to late 30s and still doesn't have a cup, maybe by then I'm pulling for him a little bit, assuming that he's not playing the Rangers in the finals. But right now, just don't really care. Draisaitl, whatever. Not the biggest Corey Perry fan, not the biggest Trent Frederick fan. He, from his days with the Boston Bruins. No one that I really like on this team. You know what I mean? There's nobody that I despise, but there's nobody that I really like all that much either. So that's why they are where they are. Number 10, the Dallas Stars. The reason they're this low is basically the Mikko Rantanen effect. This guy wanted to squeeze every possible dime out of whichever team signed him to his next contract, and he's completely within his right to do that. But, he basically gave the Avs no choice but to trade him because of his enormously high contract demands. And then he acts all surprised when they do it. And then he goes to the Canes. He doesn't want to play for them. He basically told them, Rod Brindamore talked about that this guy basically said, there's only a couple of teams that I'll play for, and you're not one of them. And so the Canes had to trade him. Now, on one hand, that is kind of unfortunate for one of the Rangers' biggest rivals. So should we be thanking Rantanen? Maybe we should, but no, I don't respect players like this that just, if the conditions aren't absolutely perfect, that they're going to be all, upset about it, and then they're going to throw a fit and they're going to basically force their way out. And that's what he's done twice in the same season here. Now he gets $12 million a season over 8 years. And good for him. He made it work and he found a way, but I'm not going to root for Mikko Rantanen. That is for sure. And then you look at other players on the team, Jamie Benn, mixed feelings on him. Certainly, I respect his style of play. He's certainly a throwback and everything. He's also kind of a punk. There were a couple of games where, he was trying to bully the Rangers. And look, it's on the Rangers to respond. Like I said, mixed feelings on Jamie Benn. You do have a couple of former Rangers. Colin Blackwell had the Game 2 overtime winner, so that was pretty cool. The Stars were looking at an 0-2 deficit and having to go on the road, and Blackwell made sure that did not happen. Nils Lundkvist is on LTIR. I mean, whatever. He was here for like 10 minutes. Brendan Smith is there. I'll always respect him and appreciate him for doing what he had to do and fighting Tom Wilson, but he hasn't really been playing in the playoffs. Only 32 games this season for Brendan Smith. Number 11, I'm going to go with the Vegas Golden Knights. This is one of those teams that I think at a certain point you just get sick of. Mark Stone, we can start there, and that BS that they pull every season. And I know that it's not technically against the rules, but I think we can all agree that it's completely ridiculous. 3 straight seasons, Mark Stone getting right around the trade deadline, all of a sudden needs to go on LTIR, thus creating essentially more cap space. And, he always seems to magically get healthy right before game 1 of the Stanley Cup playoffs begin. Isn't that just such a crazy coincidence? 3 straight years with that. Tired of that. I mean, again, I know it's technically within the rules, but it's absolutely ridiculous. Jack Eichel, not the biggest fan of him. It always felt like when he was in Buffalo that he was kind of looking for the exit and wanted to go somewhere else. I don't know that for sure. There was a whole bunch of drama there, though. He won a Stanley Cup. I don't need to see Jack Eichel win a second Stanley Cup unless he's with the Rangers in a couple of years. Then we can talk about it for sure. And then you've got a couple of former Rangers, Brett Howden and Riley Smith. And, I don't dislike either player, but neither one of them really did a whole lot when they were with the Rangers. They both have a Stanley Cup to their name. I don't really care if either of the two of them win another one. It's not like a situation like with Zuccarello or Buchnevich where you'd really like to see that happen. So, yep, Vegas at number 11. In just a second, we're going to this last tier. There's 5 teams left. And these are the 5 teams that just like worst case scenario, like I do not want to see these teams win the Stanley Cup under any circumstances. And we will get to that in just a second. All right, let's go ahead and wrap up today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers by talking about the 5 teams that just, man, I'm going to be sick if one of these teams win the Stanley Cup. And we'll start number 12. It's going to be the Florida Panthers. To begin with, I just don't really like Sam Bennett all that much. He's crossed the line multiple times, all these sucker punches and hits to the head and late hits. And, it's gone over the top with him, I think, for sure. And watch him be the next member of the New York Rangers. I know some Ranger fans want them to add Bennett in the offseason. That's certainly a topic that we'll discuss a little bit later. But, man, this guy really crosses the line and does so fairly often and fairly flagrantly as well. And then you've got Paul Maurice. Now, let me say right off the bat here, I do not dislike Paul Maurice, but does anybody else get tired of his routine? I'm even laughing as I'm saying this because in a way it is funny, but can this guy just ever be asked a question by a journalist and just give a straight answer? We get it, dude. You're the quirky, funny, lighthearted coach with the media. Okay, fine. But one time in your coaching career, can you just give a normal answer? Can you just hear a question and just answer it? It's always something just weird and over the top. And again, it is funny in a way, but I don't know, man. Can you just one time play it seriously? I don't know. So there's that. And he's got his Stanley Cup, and he deserves a Stanley Cup. Hell of a coach for a very long time, but he got his Stanley Cup. I don't need to see him win another one. That's kind of where I'm at with that. Brad Marchand is on this team now. I certainly don't need to see him win another Stanley Cup. Is anybody else rooting for that to happen? If you're a fan of the New York Rangers or a fan of any team other than the Panthers, probably not. Are Bruins fans rooting for Marchand at this point? Maybe they are. I mean, it wasn't his decision to be traded. But, that's one of the Bruins' rivals. They probably have mixed feelings, I would imagine. And another thing to consider here, the Panthers beat the Rangers last year in the conference final. And that kind of sent the Rangers on a spiral. We didn't know it at the time. But when you look at how last season ended and how this season went, was that the Rangers' last shot at it? At least with this current era of Ranger hockey, it's possible. Now, look, the Panthers, I mean, they got to do what they got to do. They got to take down whoever they're playing. So I shouldn't really take it that personally. And certainly the Ranger downfall is more of a result of what the Rangers have done than anything that happened with the Panthers last year. But still, it's kind of hard at this point where things stand to not look back and think like, man, that was their last shot. And it really went downhill in a heck of a hurry. And the Panthers were the team that sort of sent them on this downward spiral. And as I've mentioned with some other teams on this list, I don't need to see the same team win the Stanley Cup every season. The Panthers have been to the finals 3 times. They won it most recently last year against the Oilers. I don't need to see back-to-back Cup winners. I'll pass on that. Even though I will say, even though I have them in this final tier, the teams that I really don't want to see win the Stanley Cup, I am rooting for them in this round because at number 13 on this list is the Tampa Bay Lightning. I mentioned this earlier with Vegas. Tampa Bay, this is like the quintessential, I'm just sick of this team. They're always in it. They're always in the mix. They're always making a deep run. They're always a threat to potentially win it all. And, that's been the case for several seasons now. John Cooper, not the biggest fan of him. I mean, just a very arrogant coach. And he did get humbled, I think, a little bit after the Blue Jackets swept the Lightning, 5-6 years ago, however long it was at this point. But not the biggest John Cooper fan. Kucherov, I've said for a long time, gets away with a lot. I think he's one of the more low-key, dirty players in the NHL. Jake Gensel is an absolute crybaby. I mean, he learned from the best for a lot of years there. And I think most of you know what I'm talking about when I say that. But, think about that too. So I wasn't the biggest fan of the Panthers or the Lightning even before this season. But the Panthers add Brad Marchand and Tampa adds Jake Gensel. So that just kind of adds more fuel to the fire. And just makes me root even more for these teams to get eliminated sooner rather than later. And obviously, one of them is going to go down in the first round because they're playing each other, and Florida currently leads 3-1. So we'll see what happens there. But, Tampa, they've won this 2 Stanley Cups recently. I don't need to see them win another one. They do have Ryan McDonough on the team, but he's already got 2 Stanley Cups. So as much as I like McDonough as a member of the Rangers, I don't really care if he wins a 3rd Stanley Cup. I'm sorry, especially if it's going to be, for a team like Tampa Bay. I will say this. There is one player that I really like on Tampa Bay who I would root for, and that would be Cam Atkinson. Interviewed him, back in the day when he was just getting started in his NHL career. And like we mentioned with Pacioretty earlier, another guy that I interviewed, Cam Atkinson could be his last shot. He only played 39 games this year for the Lightning. His production has fallen off of a cliff, but he was a great interview. He was very friendly and very down to earth, and enjoyed talking some hockey with him, for the one time that I did get to interview him. So the silver lining of Tampa winning it all is Cam Atkinson would be a Stanley Cup champion. Now we're getting into the bottom 3. We're going to go bronze, silver, gold right in a row here. The bronze medal, as far as teams that I just would be sick if they won the Stanley Cup, it's going to be the Carolina Hurricanes. It takes a lot to get me to root for the Carolina Hurricanes against anybody, but I actually am rooting for them in the first round of the playoffs. We'll get to their opponent shortly. Not the biggest Sebastian Aho fan. Svechnikov is always out there pulling something. He borders, I don't know if you'd call him a dirty player, but somebody that tends to run the goalie and, go after players that aren't necessarily fighters and whatnot. I'm not the biggest Svechnikov fan. Then you've got guys that I'm not the biggest fan of. Like, I don't despise them, but Taylor Hall, whatever. Jordan Stahl, whatever, But I will say this. The Canes being up 3-1 on the Devils is actually the perfect scenario for this series. Because, first of all, we know that one of these 2 Ranger rivals is getting knocked out of the playoffs in the first round. But given that the Canes are up 3-1 on the Devils right now, either the Devils are getting knocked out, and that's awesome. I think most Ranger fans will be happy about that. Or they'll come back and win this series, and the Canes choke again. They choke away another big-time series lead, and that kind of throws that franchise into turmoil a little bit. That's a crisis because they've been knocking on the door, but they can't ever complete any of these runs under Rod Brind'Amour. You blow a 3-1 series lead in round 1, heads might start rolling in the offseason. So we'll see what happens there. So it's unfortunate that either the Devils or Canes have to advance. I think it will ultimately end up being the Canes, but, we'll see how it goes. The one silver line to the Canes winning it all, Jesper Fast is still on that team. And Jesper Fast to me is a championship level player. He's not a superstar. We know that. But I do think Jesper Fast, just look at what he brings to the table, his work ethic, the blue collar mentality. He is a Stanley Cup winning type player, like in a 3rd line role, maybe even a 4th line role, depending on, the team and what the fit might be. But if the Canes were to win the whole thing, that would be the big silver lining for me. Jesper Fast winning a Stanley Cup. I would enjoy seeing Jesper Fast lift the cup. Silver medal, the number 2 worst case scenario. We're going to go with the Washington Capitals. I despise this team. I almost put them dead last, if you can believe that. Tom Wilson. Do I really need to say anything? Is there anybody on the planet that watches hockey that's not a Caps fan that wants to see Tom Wilson win another Stanley Cup? Probably not. And I don't need to go into details why, but it goes beyond him. You've got, Pierre-Luc Dubois, who's there. This guy whines and pouts and cries like a baby every time things aren't going his way. He's 26 years old, and he's on his 4th team, his 4th fresh start, or I guess his 3rd fresh start. As soon as things are not going his way, he basically just kind of mails it in and phones it in, forces the team to trade him. I don't want to see somebody like that win a Stanley Cup. I'm completely out on that. Alex Ovechkin, I don't necessarily despise him. I'm glad that he has the 1 Stanley Cup, but he's been a Ranger nemesis for many, many years. I don't really want to see him win another Stanley Cup. I acknowledge the storyline of him chasing his 2nd cup at his advanced age in the same season where he broke Gretzky's record. That is a compelling storyline for sure, and that could be good for hockey, but no, I don't need to see Alex Ovechkin win a 2nd Stanley Cup. Yeah, TJ Oshie, last year in the playoffs, he spent the entire series, following Panarin around, trying to punk him out, and then Panarin just unloaded on him with a big-time open ice hit and took him down on that one. And I don't want anybody to get hurt or anything, but it was nice to see Oshie get a receipt from Panarin on that play. Then you have these Caps that have been there for a while, and again, like I don't like despise any of them, but I mean Carlson, Eller is back, Nick Dowd. Like I'm just tired of these guys. At a certain point, division rival, even players that aren't necessarily superstars, you just get tired of seeing them in the middle of everything through all these games, all these playoff series the Rangers have played against the Capitals. You're just kind of over it. The Caps do have former Ranger Dylan McElrath, but that is not even close to being enough to make me root for this team under really any circumstances. There's only one team in the playoffs right now that I would root for the Caps against, and that would be the team that comes in dead last here, number 16, the New Jersey Devils. Again, I don't think I need to give too much of an explanation. This is an old school rival of the Rangers. That rivalry is kind of re-intensified in recent seasons. All kinds of battles over the years, over the decades in the playoffs, all these classic moments. Each team has knocked the other team out of the dance on multiple occasions, often in heartbreaking fashion for one team or the other. Most recently, obviously, we did see the Rangers give up that 2-0 series lead and lose to the Devils in 7 games. That was a really rough ending and, frankly, a really embarrassing ending for the Rangers. These two fan bases are always at each other's throats. It really gets ugly on social media, and I don't condone certain things that members of either fan base have said to each other. You know, there are certain things that cross a line. Lighthearted smack talk is all good. You know, you do what you got to do, but you know, there's things that people say to each other that are just really nasty. And you know, as far as the players go, Timo Meier, not really a fan of him. He's kind of mastered the Nick Ritchie art of accidentally on purpose falling into the goalie. We saw him do that earlier in the playoffs. Didn't get called for anything. Basically just ran Freddie Anderson there for the Canes and knocked him out of the game. So not a Meier fan, certainly not a Jack Hughes fan. Jack Hughes is going to be the new Sidney Crosby for Ranger fans. Crosby was like public enemy number 1 for the Rangers. He can only play for so much longer. He's still a great player as Crosby, but Jack Hughes, I mean, you talk about just whiny and entitled, and you see him in the penalty box a few years ago, and he's yelling that people pay to watch me play. And I know Jack Hughes is hurt right now. I get all that, and certainly I would never wish injury on anybody. But, I mean, Ranger fans, is there anybody out there that likes Jack Hughes? As far as, like, your favorite players in this league that play on other teams, is Jack Hughes near the top of any Ranger fan list? Again, probably not. So they're dead last. And, you know, I just don't want to have to deal with the idea of the Devils going on any kind of a run here. I don't want them getting past the first round. I don't want them getting past the second round. You know, let's get them out of there as quickly as possible. They could be done as soon as tonight, and that's exactly what I hope happens. But we'll call it there. Like I said, wanted to do something fun a little bit later here on today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers. Would love to hear from you guys in the comment section as far as, you know, who do you want to see win the Stanley Cup? Obviously, it's not the Rangers, and I know there are certain Ranger fans that if the Rangers aren't in it, you're not going to watch, and I completely respect that. But I also know there's some fans like me, you can't turn away when the Stanley Cup playoffs are in action. And definitely looking forward to seeing how everything unfolds, and would love to hear from your comments. Who do you want to see win the Stanley Cup? Who do you not want to see win the Stanley Cup? You know, which player would you love to see win it? Which player would you hate to see win it? Et cetera, et cetera. Definitely let me know how you feel. But again, thank you guys so much for getting me to 300. That was a while ago. Getting me to 1,300 episodes. It is very much appreciated. And you know what? Here's to the next 1,300. Thank you guys so much, and I will see you next time.